Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is much requested, especially ever since I did my get ready with me, where you kind of saw little tidbits of me studying. For the past couple of years I was trying to pass these professional exams and I did really back burner it, but finally I was able to pass all four to become a certified fraud examiner, a certificate that I didn't really need because I already had 2 law degrees, a master's and a qualifying law degree, and I was called to the bar, so I've had exams up to here. But I decided to do it anyway because I believe in lifelong learning and it's something that would be useful to me in my industry because I do work in securities regulations. So I decided to really knuckle down for, I would say, about a month, a little bit over a month, and just get them done. And that's kind of the way you have to do it with these particular exams because you have a 30-day countdown from the moment that you activate your exam code. So I had to pass all 4 in that time period. So it wasn't necessarily so much that I needed to pass them all at once, but more that that is just how the certification is built. I'm really hoping that these will be applicable very much across the board of different professions, but it is coming slightly from like a regulatory legal kind of background, something very verbal. So I think these are very applicable for those sorts of fields or any fields where you need to just retain and apply a lot of information. Down below I will link for you my previous study tips video because I still applied all of those tips in order to pass these 4 exams, but passing them definitely made me think about what else I do that you guys might find useful that I can kind of pass along to you. For these exams I was working full-time, and lots of you may be also working while you're in full-time or part-time education, which I think is the toughest combination because they are very different mindsets. What worked for me is to schedule my studying so that I could still go about my day pretty normally, but with roughly 1-hour additions of studying. So I still had, you know, my sort of 9 to 5 day or whatever work required. And then in the morning, I would get up a little bit earlier and get some studying in then, usually around 45 minutes. I kind of squished down my getting ready time a little bit and got up a little bit extra early. So I would usually wake up close to 7 and I would wake up close to 6 instead. And then I would study usually about an hour right after work and before I had dinner, so that I had something to kind of look forward to and still had a little bit of evening after, and I wasn't studying when I was really tired. I often would have a little bit of a snack and then sit down, study for an hour, and then make dinner. That became kind of my life for the month and a half period that I was studying. I was actually in exams for a month and kind of prepping for the first exam, you know, and kind of for pulling that trigger for a couple of weeks beforehand. That AM-PM combination worked for me really well, but I think the question you have to ask yourself is, when are you most alert? Science behind the whole AM-PM routine though. So for AM, it's just when you're freshest, you don't have any stress of the day yet really. Often you may not even have that much of a to-do list right when you wake up, so it's a good time to really focus. And then the PM part of it is actually scientifically proven that as long as you're not studying when you're, you know, past capacity already, you're able to really kind of focus for about an hour and then kind of take that information into your sleep pattern. I know this sounds weird, but your brain will be able to store that better than if you'd learned it much earlier in the day. So actually I would tend to prioritize the most kind of memorization time in the evening, sort of more understanding in the morning, more memorization in the evening. And then I would find that the next day, even if I hadn't felt like I was retaining that much at the time I was studying, I would somehow remember it well. I always used to see so many students with flashcards, and I have my own method that is a little bit of a twist on that that I think is a lot more effective. So flashcards just mean writing down like maybe terms or formulas that you need to memorize and just kind of constantly referring to it and rereading it over and over again. My method which I call reduction, is all about simplifying what you read into smaller and smaller chunks of information, which will end in you having something like a little post-it note per topic that just jogs your memory or includes anything that you already don't remember or don't understand. So you are going to take like maybe a whole chapter of a textbook and just whittle it down again and again. So you might start with like a couple of pages of notes just to get everything from that really important chapter. Let's say you know it's going to probably be on the exam, and then you're going to take those couple of pages of notes, you're going to reduce them again into one page, then reduce them again into maybe one of those like aligned long post-its, and then write down to a little post-it until you can just throw it away. It's essentially a process of simplifying, summarizing, and compressing information into smaller and smaller lots. And it's not just about kind of minimizing something, like kind of squeezing it into a little box. It's also a little bit of a magical process, because each time you do that, each time you compress more and more, you're actually running it through your brain and thinking about it as you kind of simplify it. So it's a very active process. It's a really active way of taking notes. And if you tend to kind of zone out or lose track of time when you're studying, or you feel like you're wasting a lot of time just rereading very passively, this is the answer. At least try it. For me, it has been career making, I guess, or educationally very, very effective. My third tip is all about recollection. So let's say there's a formula that you really need to remember, or a Latin term or something like that. It's all about reading it and then putting the page away and remembering it, and then looking at it again to make sure that it's accurate. And that process, again, a very active process, will allow you to retain it so much faster than if you're just passively reading it over and over off of the page. The act of remembering something really calcifies things in your memory in a way that reading them usually doesn't for people. But keep in mind, everybody's brain works differently. So something you need to figure out during higher education, if not before, is how you remember things. If you have a visual memory, then you can just look at the pages and kind of remember how they look. There's so many different ways of approaching that based on how you learn best. But I think across the board, it's fair to say that remembering information will work well for all of those different types of learners. It's really when you sit down and try and teach something to someone that you realize that you don't understand it as well as you thought you did. It's definitely been like that for me when I first started teaching contract law. I teach it to a master's program. I had to go back and relearn a lot of things that I thought I knew really well, just because teaching is harder than learning in so many ways. And so I think the best way to learn really, really well is to try and teach it just for fun to your cat, your parent, your boyfriend, whomever, anyone in your life who is patient enough to sit through learning about Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever it is that you're learning is your person. That time will be really well used. So I said that in my last video, and I want to do an add-on for that. Asking questions is also really, really key. So if you're able to do that and have someone do a Q&A with you where you might be asking each other questions, so for example in a study group type of setting, you will also really, really benefit from that. And I think it's also a good reminder that that's what your professors are for. They are there for you to have chats with and discuss things with. So I often hear from my students that they really benefit from getting to email me or talk to me about what they don't understand, because as soon as you come out of that, you realize that you maybe actually knew more than you thought, or you remember what your professor said during that chat really, really well, much more so than if you had just Googled it and tried to figure it out on a text-based basis. At the end of the day, anything that's going to have an interpersonal element, teaching, discussing, any kind of Q&A is very active and going to get you to understand and remember better. My fifth tip is to make sure you approach things from different angles. So this is where I do think it is useful to do maybe some Google research or text-based research, whatever is appropriate for your industry. Because I think reading, again, the same passage over and over isn't necessarily going to get you to understand something. If that paragraph is kind of confusing to you in the first place, reading it 15 more times isn't going to tend to really help. So if you can maybe consult a different textbook, find someone else's way of approaching the idea, or find like a nice little pithy blog post. You know, there's a lot of lawyers who will do these little blog posts on their sites because it's good SEO for them. Usually those are written much more concisely than a textbook. So if you're looking for a case summary, you just want to understand what that dissenting judgment said. I have to say it because I recently passed my driver's test, which is a very different type of test than probably most of you are facing when you're watching this video. Most of you are going to be coming to this from a more academic angle, but you never know, it may be more of a practical angle too. And I really struggled with nerves on my driving test, and that was a new challenge for me because I do pretty well with maintaining my composure during an exam setting, or even during a debate, mooting, like legal argument kind of setting. But I had never faced anything so practical where someone is watching your every move. And so the ability to just breathe, take 5 deep breaths to just calm myself, slow my heart rate, and compose myself, I think allowed me to pass. And I really struggled with that. The first time that I tried to pass my driving exam, I just kind of lost control of that and of my breathing, and just got so panicked. And it made me really empathize with people who struggle with that on academic exams, because I think it's not uncommon. I'm lucky not to really have struggled with it too much, but I think it's really not that uncommon for very intelligent people to suddenly feel panic because of the amount of information that you're dealing with and the stressful setting that you're in. So if you can just take a moment and just calm down. Number 7, this one was huge for these professional exams, and it was also huge when I took the Canadian Securities course, another professional exam that I took way back when I started in the securities regulation industry. Oh my goodness, practice exams are everything. And I did find them useful when I was in law school, mostly because it gave me an idea of what that professor wanted to test and what their testing style was. But when it came to multiple choice for professional exams, it has made such a huge difference because it can actually help you learn. It's not just about exam strategy, it's actually about learning, because those practice exams will highlight what you really struggle with. So what I recommend is actually to have a little notepad on the side while you're sitting your exam, and as much as it'll eat up a little bit of your time, ultimately those don't count. So time yourself, but quickly jot down, you know, any key issues that you encounter during that practice exam as it's going, that you know you need to revise because you don't understand it as well as you thought you did, or maybe the questions go much deeper than you thought they might. And I did that for the Certified Fraud Examiner certificate, and I really felt like those practice exams suddenly gave me clarity about what I was kind of expected to know and how it was sort of going to be examined. And until I got there, I think that's why I dragged it on for so long, because my whole study process felt very aimless. It didn't have a lot of direction, and then I think I lacked motivation because of that as well. So I would say take the practice exam earlier. I didn't want to waste it. That's why I kind of held it back until the last minute, kind of saving it so it would be fresher in my memory. But I actually really wish I had done it earlier. So maybe think about doing that depending on how your course is structured, so that you can really benefit from that combination of being tested and also using it as a learning tool earlier on. I have 3 tips left for you, but they're not about the revision period, because my whole last study tips video and then the bulk of this one has focused entirely on everything that happens before you get to the exam, except for the breathing part, which is the in-between. So consider that the intermission. Vigilator says to go ahead and pick up your pencils. What do you do then? You know, how do you really show off your learning so that you get those grades that you deserve? Well, I have 3 tips for you, 2 for multiple choice and 1 for more written essay type questions. So for multiple choice questions, my huge tip for you that I actually give my students when I teach them my course is to look at the answers first. Because if you look at the answers, it'll give you an idea of the direction of the question, what it's actually about. So if all of the different multiple choice answers are all about evidence, you know, different types of hearsay, for example, then you know that that's what the question is about. And so as you're reading it, you're actually reading it much more actively, and your brain is already thinking of what the answer should be. So I actually approach them backwards. I think it works really well. What you have to make sure is that once you've done that and you've read those answers first, you do the second part, which is to read the question carefully. I know it sounds so basic, and I feel like it goes in one ear and comes out the other with my students, but I see it so often that you just are so stressed, this is where the breathing comes in, that you misread the question. So for example, you miss the word not, like which answer is not applicable, and you answer instead for which answer is applicable. You essentially answer in reverse. And there are a lot of multiple choice questions, unfortunately, because teachers are evil, that are kind of worded to trick you a little bit. So it's not so much going to like, what do you know? How hard have you studied? But are you paying attention? Are you actually really reading this question accurately? So really take the time to do that. Don't fall into those holes, because that will score you such easy grades, right? You got here, you have the ability to read carefully, you just need to actually do it. Eliminate the answers. So it may be that you still aren't too sure about which of the answers it is. If you study pretty hard, you can probably narrow it down to 2, but then all of a sudden you are increasing your probability of getting the answers right if you actually eliminate the wrong one and make sure that you only pick out of the 2 that you are pretty sure are right. And on a professional exam where it's kind of pass fail, I think that's especially useful. But on any exam really, I remember using this on my SATs a lot. You don't have the ability to really think about things for a really long time. So the best way you can sometimes approach it is just to eliminate the obviously wrong ones, leaving the obviously right one to shine, be selected, and get you those points. There's a lot I could say about this, but I'm going to keep it to 2 interrelated points. Number 1, when you look at the question, think like your teacher. My second part goes back to that. You've sat in all those lectures, you've put in that time to really listen to this educator that's, taking their time to impart their knowledge to you. I guarantee you know what they think is really important in the course, because they have been emphasizing it to you from the very beginning. If this is any kind of quality educator, they've been highlighting key points. So when you read that question, whether it be an essay or short answer question, think of them, because they're the people who wrote it, who have been teaching you, and so you know what is key in the course. Make sure that you also structure your answer accordingly. Think of the structure of the course, how well organized it's been. Make sure you structure your answer accordingly. Don't just go with the flow of consciousness. Maybe do little headers. I love it when I open up an exam and I can see there are little underlined headers, or things are numbered, or just nicely organized in space. Let me tell you, it makes such a difference. In the rush of the exam, you forget that, and you just want to write and just make sure that you've just regurgitated everything on the page. But if it has no organization and no flow to it, it's going to make it so much harder, and you are not going to score those points as well as if you had really shown your knowledge in a more organized manner. So those are my top 10 study tips coming from someone who has just come out of the other side, and so I want to take a moment to just really wish you luck. I think it's so wonderful that you've embarked on whatever learning that you are currently in the middle of. I promise you, once you are on the other side, it will be worth it. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you can see my next installment on YouTube. Bye!